Good evening, folks. This is The Weird Part, and I am your host, Vincent Treewell. I am very pleased this evening to have a special guest, Brother Seamus. He is an independent Catholic priest, and welcome, Brother Seamus.
Hello to your audience.
Yes. Well, thanks for appearing here tonight. Just to make things clear, any frequent listener of The Weird Part knows that I've had a lot of people on from a lot of different backgrounds. Obviously, their views are their own. And Brother Seamus is not here as a representative or spokesperson of anyone but himself. And that's generally the policy with everybody. There's basically only three types of people I won't have on. I won't have somebody from a cult. I did research his organization and felt completely comfortable with it. I won't have anybody on who's into hate, and that's not here. And I won't have anybody on who's fake. Everybody I have on sincerely believes what they're saying. I'm not vouching for them, but I'm just providing a forum where we can talk about things. And the sincerity of this man really struck me from day one. So please, Brother Seamus, tell us in your own words, what is it that you do?
Well, I'm trying to start a ministry in my area. We'll just say New England. And it's because it happened just before COVID. So that messed up the workings of it. I was finally ordained last year. So I've been a priest now since April, a full year. Though my bishop that originally I was under was in Florida, and he wasn't close. So
yeah.
I was pretty much left on my own. I am seminary and educated, though. I have a master's in divinity. I'm about to finish my doctorates in ministry and Christian counseling, and then I'm going to attempt to do pastoral counseling, paradoxically, at Liberty University, which is really funny because I'm a liberal.
I understand why it's funny, but the audience will get it a little later, I think.
Yeah, I am, I'm like center left, I think, In fact, I just recently went from being a Democrat to finally just putting down that I'm a independent socialist, and that I can't,
You would be pretty solidly on the left.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
But not the radical.
No, well, it's interesting because there have been Catholic priests like the Berrigan brothers in Vietnam that were kind of radical left. Well, I live in Milwaukee, where Father Grappi, some would say, was a bit radical, but it's interesting. It seems your dog wants to be part of the show. You might want to turn off the speaker, possibly. Have we got?
Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, perfectly. Right on.
You're still gonna hear him bark.
I'm still gonna hear the dog, but that's fine. We have a acceptance of barking dogs policy here. Yes, and hopefully mine doesn't hear him and then start trying to counter bark. So you are a Christian priest.
Hold on, let me try and put him in the room.
Okay, no problems.
You're gonna cut this out, right?
I mean, I can. I don't do a whole lot of editing usually. I kind of just, I'll probably cut this chunk out, but we'll see.
Yeah, just because of your audience might get annoyed about that.
Yeah.
Anyways, what were you gonna?
I was just gonna ask you.
What were you gonna ask me?
You're a Christian priest. Under what church do you minister?
I am part of an independent Catholic church. I'm just not going to say in case I say something that's unsavory. But it's part of
no pressure.
Independent, the independent Catholic Church. It's the they follow the old Catholic tradition, which is a splinter group of the Roman Catholic faith back in the 1860s in Germany and in Holland. I guess they were the reluctant ones to become Protestants, and when they decided that the Pope was infallible, they had an issue with that and they left.
Yes, yes. Now I'm a little more familiar with that than perhaps everybody listening, or many people listening. There was a real split in the Catholic Church when they declared the Pope to be infallible. That was a real red line for some people. And we're part of that tradition then.
Yes, I come from that tradition. I mean, I respect the Pope and everything, but I feel it's an outdated concept. I think there should just be bishops. You know, they all work together and they vote. The Pope doesn't really have that much power anymore. Like, look at Pope Frank. I love the guy. He's one of the few popes I love. But everything he tries to say something, people jump on his back.
Yes. Yeah? Oh, yes. And we're definitely going to get to that. But I wanted to just kind of warm things up so people get on a basic understanding. Some of these are going to be some real entry level questions that you could probably just Google, but I have a pretty diverse audience and people may not know what we're talking about.
Okay.
Because when most Americans hear priest, they think Roman Catholic, but things are not nearly that simple. Could you kind of elaborate on the different types of churches?
Yes. There originally was one church up until the 10th century. In the 3rd century, there started to be a divide because the Pope Leo was claiming to have more power than he did. He decided that somehow that he was following St. Peter. And we don't know historically if St. Peter ever was a bishop in Rome. We know most likely he was killed there. That's where they have his bones and so forth, supposedly. And they have St. Paul there too, who was beheaded. So then after that, the 15th century came. Oh, wait a minute, sorry. So there was a split in the 10th century, and you had the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics, which was pretty much the Greek, which is Orthodox, and Latin, which was Western Church. And as you know, in the medieval church, at least in Western Europe, Latin was what was said at the church service. It was up to fairly recently, to 1965, that they went to English. So that's
Yes.
all the way.
Yeah. You wrote okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You wrote an absolutely fascinating paper on the 7 ecumenical councils. At least I found it fascinating. And it felt a lot to me. I have a background in practicing law, and it felt a lot like reading Supreme Court opinions, like interpreting the Constitution. You know, things that seem simple and obvious often aren't. And, you know, they had to break down exactly what does this mean? What does the Trinity mean? What is Jesus Christ being God and being man at the same time? What does that mean? And they had numerous councils to decide these things. And you wrote a really interesting paper on that. And it showed how. Go ahead. What's that?
That might have been copied. I
okay.
have to look at it.
Whoever wrote it, it was very interesting.
Yeah. So pretty much Catholics and the Orthodox and the Old Catholics, and I think even the Anglicans and Lutherans believe in the 7 councils, which they pretty much agree on everything, except for the Coptic Church, which for some reason doesn't like the idea of Jesus being God and man. They figure he's just one or the other. And for Catholics, the idea is Jesus is truly God and man. And some of the earlier debates were, the original, founders of Christianity were Jews. They lived as Jews. All the apostles were Jews. The Blessed Mother was a Jew, and they were monotheists. They believed in one God. And later on, how can there be two gods? Jesus and his Father. And how I guess that came about over time is the idea that God reveals himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is not very perfect. But I like to tell people, think of H2O. It could be steam, it can be liquid, and it could be ice, but it's still H2O. So God can reveal himself. But what I want to say is different about Christianity that's from other religions is God became one of us. God picked the Virgin Mary, the Holy Tikonokos, which means God there in Greek, carry him. And all Jesus' DNA came from Mary's family. That's how special Mary is. And that's why in the Roman and the Orthodox Church and some in the Anglican Church venerate Mary. They don't worship her, but they look at her as an example. And I just got done reading an interesting book about Mary and the early church women. It appears that the women were much more active within the church than the Catholics and the Orthodox like to let on. It seems like it's very possible that even the Virgin Mary might have preached, which I did not know to reading that book. I find that fascinating. I don't know if I fully agree with the premise of it, but clearly the author made some really interesting comments. If you want, I'll give you the link to the book. It's just, it's interesting, and they show pictures of Mary with a cloth on her waist for communion and stuff. And they have a picture of Theodora holding a chalice. And if she wasn't holding a chalice, could she have been a priest or a deaconess? We don't know. A lot of that has been lost to her.
I'll be honest, I am not shocked at all by the idea that the early church was much more accepting of women in an equal role than it later became. That doesn't contradict anything I've ever read about the suppression of the divine feminine and the suppression of women in religious life. That actually fits in pretty much perfectly. So yeah, that would not come as a total shock to me.
Yes. In fact, the word in Greek for Holy Spirit is feminine. So some have called it the Father, the Son, and the Mother. But
Which
I'm more comfortable.
makes a lot of sense, yes.
And because Jesus already had a mother, the Virgin Mary, But it was the Holy Spirit that came into Mary and brought Jesus into the world. So I just feel like human beings had to be a part of that, going back all the way to Abraham, Moses, and so on, to Jesus, to the apostles. We're still in the time when Jesus will return. And it's going to be a scary time. And the way the world's going now, talking about another war possibly in Europe, in the Slavic area again, where they had the Bosnian wars. I mean, endless wars. In the Ukraine, God forbid if they hit one of the nuclear reactors, we're all stoners,
Oh yes. Since you mentioned Ukraine, would you say, I mean, just in your opinion, was the split between Catholic and Orthodox really over a fairly, and I don't mean unimportant, but just a fairly obscure theological point, or was it really about power politics?
It was probably both. The Greeks are very detailed. They're very, if you look at the Greek language, it's very precise. And the big difference between the Catholics and the Greeks is just one little word, where it's like the Greeks are saying it's the Father, the Holy Spirit, then Jesus, where the Catholics do the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So it's a slight word difference. Same thing with the Coptics with the rest of the Orthodox Church. That's a slight difference if they don't agree on the idea of Jesus being God and man.
Some of these things seemed really like just matter, almost semantic, you know what I mean? Just matters of wording, you know. But I'm sure
Well,
there's
the two,
other things going on too.
yeah, the two traditions really, were slightly different. But interesting enough, there was one church, the Holy Catholic Church, really up to the 10th century, and that's when the split happened. And then you have the Catholic and the Orthodox, and then the West split more, and you have the Protestants who come to believe that you put the Bible first before the church. But what they don't realize is that the Orthodox like to point out is they were writing the Bible, the New Testament, at that time. So that's why they didn't put every single thing in there, And that traditions, give meaning to the church. Like you have most Protestants only want baptism and communion. Now those are two major sacraments, but there's others too. There's penance, which is a good practice to do because it holds you accountable and you also get it off your chest. Then there's First Communion, where you get communion. Now, interesting enough, in the Orthodox Church, they give you communion right after you're baptized. So when you're a little baby, they give you like a little piece of it. And then there's confirmation, which I believe all traditions do to an extent. They might word it differently. And then there's matrimony and ordination and the last rites. Now, most Protestant churches don't do that. Those are all have biblical premises, but they just use different wording. That's one thing I think with the Catholics. They made things a lot of more words than necessary, even with the Greeks. Like sometimes in the Greek prayer, sometimes they want you to say a word 40 times. I mean, come on, 4 times, 5 times, I get it, but 40, come on.
I grew up Methodist, and yes, I can tell you there's very little of the mystical in Methodism. It's pretty much, I was told, well, and I went through confirmation as a teen and was told by the pastor that communion is completely symbolic. It's just it's a ritual, but they don't believe in transubstantiation at all. And I was told by the pastor that we could do this with Pepsi and potato chips and it'd be the same thing. It's just it's a remembrance, but nothing actually happens. And that's pretty much Protestant doctrine, which is extremely different than the Eucharist. That's totally, absolutely different than the Eucharist, which we'll get to in just a second. Go ahead.
Keep in mind, the Methodists come out of John Wesley, who was Church of England. And for what I understand, he was high church. So he, believed in the body and blood of Jesus, the bread and the wine was more than just an object. So keep that in mind. Because like when John Wesley, I guess, jumped the horse, he made regular lay preachers into bishops. That's why we have the word Cokesbury now. Those are the two names of the two bishops that were formed. Now, these guys were not following the apostle accession. That's another big thing that makes Catholics and Orthodox different from the Protestants.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Could you briefly explain apostolic succession?
Well, if tradition holds, it believes that it goes all the way back to Jesus Christ. Now, I believe this because this is what we're taught. But sometimes I wonder if that's necessarily so, because I think people are all over the place. Even in the gospel lessons, they talk about the disciples came to Jesus complaining there's somebody doing something, and he says those that are for us are not against us. So maybe by the Spirit we're led too. Like with my, for instance, with me, I have a learning disability called nonverbal learning disorder, and I might be on the autism spectrum. Now that word is just like a word that says this person has a learning disability. Now, I didn't find this out to about last summer, so I only known about it. I knew I had a learning disability. I had like teachers tell my parents they couldn't teach me, that I was lost cause, And
I'm sorry. Particularly, you're
education.
working on your doctorate right now, so I mean that shows you what that's worth. But yes.
Yeah, but at the same time, some would poo-poo my doctrine because they say it's not accredited. But I work very hard on it. I need
Oh,
help
absolutely.
with my grammar. That's my problem. So I had people help me edit the paper, but it was my premise. And the idea is what the independent Catholic Church needs to do. See, the problem with the independent movement over here is it's all these different breakaways. Some of them used to be Catholic priests, some of them used to be Anglicans, some of them were bishops. Like the original Old Catholic Church had a Frenchman ordained here in Wisconsin, believe it or not.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, you'll see it in one of the papers I gave you, I believe.
Yes. Oh, I'm
And
familiar with him. Yes.
yes, and it's just interesting. Then he went back to France. Then he somehow with I think the Middle East. I started a new branch. I mean, it's a bit overwhelming. And over here, some of the independent movements are very strict. They still believe that only in men clergy, and at least you know where they stand. And there's some within the community. Now, that when I say community, I mean that in the vaguest sense of the word, because that's the problem. There is no community. All these different churches are little places, and there's no community. Like I have my bishops all the way in New Hampshire, not New Hampshire, New Mexico, and I may never see him in person. He's quite far. I'm trying to get into a mainline denomination, but I don't think that will happen because I'd like to have some community. I would like to be trained a little bit more than I am because I'm education-wise, I'm good, but experience I don't have as much. Especially when you don't have a church building, people really look down on you, especially
I
in the Catholic Church.
I'm sure that's true. Yes. Would it be fair to say there's probably two or three major sides in the independent Catholic movement, that there's people like yourself that are, and like say the liberal Catholic Church or the old Catholic Church, that are more socially and politically liberal. And then there's traditionalist Catholics who just want things to be like they were before Vatican II and
Yeah,
want the Latin Mass and want a return to like a 1950 era Catholic Church. And they've broken from Rome because they're not strict enough. Does that sound about right?
yes, that's true. And there are some very, very liberal independent Catholics, which I feel I would question if they really are Christian, because some of them, like this one supposed bishop told me that he believes all the gods are the same and that he doesn't believe there's a hell, doesn't believe in the Trinity. So I go, why do you claim to be Catholic then,
And if I may just jump right on that, that was going to be the third part, is the kind of weird, because of apostolic succession, because a bishop can consecrate other people, and whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent, that is valid. Some very strange people have been consecrated and made priests or made bishops, including
Like
people
the,
who are frankly not Christian at all.
yeah, like this one guy I know, he's pretty much a Satanist, and he lives with
That's
two
the
men.
thing.
He's married.
Yes, that has actually happened.
Yeah, he calls himself Morning Star after the devil, whatever that means. So, and yet, bishop I knew ordained him didn't have a problem with it, and I had to tell the other bishop about it. That's the main concern. A lot of them are not educated, and that's a big problem. Some of them don't even have a high school education. I mean, not high school, college. I think they should at least be required to have a college education. Seminary is extremely expensive. it's not for the faint of heart. You're looking between 40 and 50,000 for a 4-year degree.
Wow,
And
I
on top
learned
of that,
something. I'll be honest, and I'm not pulling any punches. I do not happen to be Catholic. Um, I assumed it was free. I assumed you showed up and they just trained you. I didn't know it cost a
for
fortune.
Roman Catholic, yes, you pretty much sign over your life to them. You go 8 years with them. And then if you're a Jesuit, you go 12 years.
Mm.
But all depends on the situation. Most Protestant churches have seminary that's 4 years. Usually you have to get an undergrad, which I did. I got an undergrad in history with a minor in philosophy. My master's of divinity was church focused about missions. Interesting enough, I wasn't required to do the Greek and Hebrew, which most people are required to do. But luckily for me, this seminary allowed a little wiggle room. It's called Alliance Theological Seminary, now called Alliance University, which is out of New York. I went there for 4 years. I ended up being 100,000 in debt.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went to a Jesuit-based law school, and it cost about the same thing, yes. But wow. But again, I'm going to go step out of there and be a lawyer. You're going to step out of there and be a priest. The pay differential is pretty significant.
Yes. Well, it's not about making money. I would do it for free. I am doing it for free right now, technically. You know, I have no problem doing that because it's the message.
Yes,
That's
yes.
what it's about Jesus Christ. As you a Methodist, someone's Presbyterian, God forbid, someone's Orthodox, Roman Catholic. I'm Irish, so the Presbyterians are kind of like our arch enemies. You know?
I almost spit my drink out. Yeah, yes. I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I am also Irish. If I may share an unrelated family story. My grandmother is 102 currently. And
God
I
bless
asked, what's that?
Thank God bless her.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, she's been a real blessing in my life. But when she was well into her 90s, I had the opportunity to ask her, how is it that we're Irish but not Catholic? Because, all the Irish that came over here are Catholic, but we've always been something else. And she said, it's really simple. Your great-great-grandmother got knocked up by a Protestant guy, and he wouldn't marry her unless she converted. Like, oh, well, thanks. As you get older, I guess you just get blunt with the facts, and that's what happened. Yes, but
Yeah,
please.
I did internship at a nursing home, and this lady would stroll around in her wheelchair, and we were doing a service one day, and she yells out, "This is fucking bullshit." My first day. I'm like, what did I get myself into? And then I found out later on, she was, before she got dementia, because they specialize in dementia, that she was a Sunday school teacher, and she never cursed in her life.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of a real dark side of mental decline in the aged, that, yeah, the first thing to go is the sense of what's appropriate. And that can be disturbing, and of course, I'm sure that you have empathy, and it's just important to understand that that's something that happens to people, and that's the thing that occurs if you live long enough. You end up saying things that people are like, what the hell did he just say?
That's what's terrifying to me, is the idea of Alzheimer's, because they
Yeah.
say you forget. And dementia, probably the same thing to a degree, but not as much. But still,
I witnessed it happen with multiple family members, and it's rough. It's rough.
I'm sorry to hear that. Interesting enough, your family, I don't know what your Irish is, but if your family was from Northern Ireland, it's possible that some of your family was Protestant Irish, and they were Methodist, or Anglican, depending on where they lived. John Wesley actually went out to Ireland,
Hmm.
and and he was going out in the open fields and talking to people, So
I can tell you, when we came over, we were definitely Catholic. County Cork and County Tipperary in Ireland. And no, we changed for very, very down to earth reasons that, yeah. And they were, it wasn't all that complicated. It was basically exactly what my grandmother said. That's pretty much it.
got in the family way. Yep.
Yes.
It happened.
And exactly. And social class was very important at that time. And on my granddad's side, becoming Protestant meant you were going to go places, and being Catholic meant you were going to be poor. And that determined a lot of things.
Money, see a setup, sadly, but you can't survive without money.
Nice.
And
Exactly.
that is the look at Trumpster. The guy claims he's a genius. He lives off of his father's money.
Oh yes,
he bankrupt 4 casinos. How's that possible? How's that possible?
I don't do a whole lot of politics here, but yeah, there's no Trump endorsement here. No, in my humble opinion, complete disgrace. Yeah.
This is how money works in our society. That
somehow,
if you have money, that will give you things. That's, I think, the major sin of America. Is the racism, obviously, but also the love of money. We're very much hung up on money. How much you make, what do you do? Like all that stuff. And I get what do you do represents who you are. Like, I'm assuming you're a lawyer, you believe in justice. I don't know what form of law you practice, but
I mean, I'm mostly retired, but yes, I absolutely do believe in justice. I believe in fair trials. I believe everybody's entitled to a fair trial and a weighing of the evidence and things like that. Yes.
And we both know that's not always the case, though.
Oh, absolutely. It is that's one of the reasons, among many, that I'm not doing that currently, is the people who needed my help the most could afford it the least. And that's a drag, The best thing I can say that I did as a lawyer, well, I had some good wins in court, but I did bankruptcy law for some very poor people who were really hunted down by collection agencies, and giving them a Chapter 7 bankruptcy and a clean slate, always felt great about that.
Yes, but also at the same time, it ruins their credit. They had to build that back up many years later, didn't they, to build up the credit?
It hurts. Well, it depends on your situation. It depends a great deal. I mean, these were people who are getting their electricity turned off. So, I mean, and they still wanted all this money. And we had some real wins there. We had some people whose lives were really improved by bankruptcy. We've wandered pretty far afield here, if I may say so. If you don't mind, and no problems. That's what we do here. We start off on one thing and we end up on something completely different. If we could just shift gears a little bit, could you briefly explain to our listeners the Catholic understanding of the Eucharist and its importance?
Well, it's the center of worship, obviously. We're told to do this in remembrance of him. Now, the Roman Catholics believe it literally becomes the body and blood of Christ. And the independent Catholics also pretty much agree with that. And the Anglicans, it's a 50-50 chance. I kind of prefer what the Orthodox view is, which is it's changed, but how it's changed, I don't know.
You might say a divine mystery.
Yes. That's what sacrament means, a mystery from the Greek.
Yes.
So, it's the center of a Catholic worship. I know some Protestants don't have communion but once a month. And growing up Roman Catholic, we had Mass every Sunday And we also have Mass on Holy Days, which most Protestant churches never do. Like 2 weeks ago was the Ascension, which was on that Thursday, which is when Jesus finally, after 40 days, went up to heaven. And
bodily and
most
physically, like levitated into the sky.
They say he just really disappeared. In
Wow.
a sense. Heaven's a very complex idea.
Oh, it certainly is. It's a fascinating concept. Now that we have telescopes and stuff, are we talking another dimension, another plane? It can get very complicated.
Yes. And that's way above my pay grade.
Oh yes, I hear you. I don't have any answers. I just have a lot of
Trust Jesus,
questions.
and I gone to prepare a place for you, and never seen. There's no more tears or suffering. That sounds good to me. And they say that we'll be with God, and they say that there'll be no sea, there will be no light except from God. So what does that mean? There's some Orthodox, which influence me, who say that heaven is just being with God. So, but at the same time, the Bible makes it sound like heaven's a literal place. So I believe that, But at the same time, the idea of no sun, water, I can't imagine that. And they say up there that we might not eat anymore, We're no longer sexual beings up there. It's scary too, but we'll be much more happier up there because of sin has corrupted human nature. Whether you believe in the literal story of Adam and Eve, or as I say, Adam and Steve, it's somehow something happened. We want to believe in evolution, which I have no problem with. I don't fully agree with the idea of it, but I do see how chimpanzees are 2% different than us. And just imagine just 2% is that radical.
Well,
Are
and
we just
if I may, anybody who doubts evolution, now I don't dispute. I believe that the Roman Catholic position is that evolution happened, and at some point there was ensoulment, and people got souls. Which that makes sense to me. But if anybody doubts that us and chimpanzees are related, they have fingerprints. Look at a monkey hand and look at a human hand, and they're damn near identical. Does that sound about right?
I know they're 2% different than us. That's all I can say to chimpanzees. Look at the gorilla; they're far more different than us. So I mean, I have no problem with the idea of evolution to a degree. To what extent, I'm not sure about. Like, we seem to be different from other animals. We know right from wrong. We're studying.
Oh yes.
There's no chimpanzees or any animal out there now doing a podcast. We also been the most destructive.
I hope you're right. Yes. I don't think there is.
Maybe there's a Vince chimpanzee out there too. Yeah.
I will, and this is off topic, but hey, we're just two people talking. I was nicknamed Albino Gorilla for so long that I made a picture of an albino gorilla and put it in my locker for years. So I've always been identified as a primate. Anyway.
Well, that might be a racist opponent, because they say the Irish, if you look at some of the early work of Irish Catholics,
that used to be
like
a thing.
They said that we were primates.
They used to portray us in the newspapers before they had photos, when they just drew the pictures. And it was real messed up because we were portrayed as gorillas in leprechaun suits, basically. And yeah, there is a, very, racist concept there. This was probably just because I was kind of a big dude and worked out, but I digress. Anyway, Let me
Yeah,
see
it's a great
here.
book, How the Irish Became White. If you want to read it, it's interesting.
Oh
book.
yes, no, that I definitely, that's a fascinating book. I am familiar with it. And it's a real story of America and how things, good and bad, and sometimes very bad, happened. And well, if anybody's, and I'm sure many people have, I've never been able to watch it all the way through, to be honest, because it's just too brutal. The movie 13 Years a Slave, um,
Yeah,
the guy who's doing all the dirty work, the beating of people, has a thick Irish accent because he just came over and was like, holy crap, they give us guns? We're in charge of something? We're not in charge of anything. What? And the guy who owns the place and runs things talks more like George W. Bush because he's old money. And he's like, I don't know, Paul, this happened. How could this happen? Like, come on, man. You knew exactly what you were doing when you brought the Irish over and paid them to hurt other people as a kind of in between you and them. And that's what you wanted, and that's what you got. And that's where the Pinkertons came from, and that's where a lot of strike breakers and bad cops and things like that tended to be heavily Irish. It was a thing. And it's complex and, obviously not exactly what we were planning on talking about tonight, but yeah, that stuff happened. It definitely did. So
I'm very much history. So
go ahead.
I'm very passionate about Irish history and Christianity.
Oh yes.
To me, they're so. Sorry to all your audience who might be English. Cheerio.
Well, and I mean, let's get down to brass tacks. Tony Blair admitted and apologized for the fact that, and this is Tony Blair, this is the Prime Minister of Great Britain in the 90s, admitted that the potato famine was genocide, that it was an act of genocide.
He did not sign it. And that's a big problem. So that means he didn't authenticate that statement. Now, his mother was Northern Irish. Keep that in mind, too, from County Down. Tony Blair, only became a Catholic after he left office. It's very possible that he, when Prime Minister, couldn't have been a Catholic to be Prime Minister.
Oh, yes, it's a big deal over there.
For many years. In fact, King Charles is the head of the church, though I think he has no seminary education whatsoever. You think that would be a requirement for the royal family? If you're supposed to be the head of the church, you should know the theology. Like Henry VIII was a really interesting fellow.
Well, yes. I mean, would it be fair to say that the Anglican Church didn't start over a theological disagreement? It started over the Pope wouldn't give Henry VIII an annulment.
I think that played a factor in it, but I do think later on theology came to it because the Reformation in England at first was very Calvinistic and very different from the Anglican Church today, which is kind of a mishmash of Catholic and Protestant. That's why I always loved that tradition. I wanted to become an Episcopal priest, but they're very picky on who they choose.
Wow.
And I also tried with the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, and they were quite picky too. So if you don't meet their criteria, they send you on your way, saying, "Oh, we'll pray for you," but that's it,
Wow. That's not a side you usually see, but I have zero doubt that happens. Wow. That's a tough experience.
If you have a physical defect, most times the Catholics will reject you outright.
Wow.
It's Roman Church, Well, that's just a physical thing you can't help, but if it's like my situation with my disability, they used to tell me that, it's nice that you feel that way, but it's not right for you, And that's why I ended up going with the independent Catholic Church. But at the same time, I'm very frustrated because, as I said before, there's lack of structure, and it's pretty much a free for all. And some of them, frankly, are not Christians. Now, I'm not saying all. I think it's a small number, but there are people in the fringe group. Like I think I showed you one of my papers about the other Catholics. And
Oh, yes.
this professor out of New York. She was talking about this one bishop out in New Mexico, not related to mine, who was Bishop Spahn or something. Not like the English, not the Episcopal priest bishop. I mean, but he said that Mary was a goddess, and that's frankly blasphemy. You know.
Well, yes,
And
when you have people who can get, consecrated and say just anything, you end up with the Episcopos Veganus, the so-called wandering bishops, people who are bishops, but they have no congregation and they are often
there are a lot,
into very different
some of them are,
things.
some of them are fake, which is disturbing, and some of them are former priests that were caught being pedophiles.
Yes, that is the thing that's a real problem. And they've been involved in all sorts of things. And yeah, there's some very problematic people there, to say the minimum.
Like this one bishop out of Ohio, he's a liberal Catholic church. He says that he believes in reincarnation. And he told me, because of my learning disability, that I wasn't mentally fit to be a priest.
Wow.
And I
That's
says that my ordination is invalid. Quite a few are like that, because the bishop that I'm under was the one who ordained me originally, was accused of sexual misconduct. And he claims he was innocent. I don't know. I didn't ask too many questions, but I found out later on that he was a sex offender. So I tried to find another bishop, but I still talk with this bishop. I'm still friends with him and do his stuff. I don't know his full story. He says one thing, I don't know. It is true that sometimes people will accuse you of things, and there's no way to prove it either way. So the best thing you could do is to make an agreement. He had to end up giving up being a lawyer. Now he's just a paralegal. But be a Marine and he used to be a cop. So I like to give him the benefit of the doubt,
it gets really complicated because there are false accusations. That was one of the things when particularly because before I was an attorney, I was a cop. I was a deputy sheriff in Milwaukee for 14 years. And the thing I feared the most was not being shot, was not being stabbed, was I feared false allegations, because I was terrified of that, because somebody can say something and it will always stick to you and hang over you. And no matter how cleared you are, some people will always mumble behind your back that, well, he really did that. And it never happened to me, but I did have good friends who I would swear, I would take to the grave, were innocent, but were accused of having sex with inmates in the jail. And I have no belief at all that happened, but people would always kind of mumble, well, you know what he did. Well, yeah, because innocent till proven guilty doesn't really apply in the real world, Yeah. Now that doesn't mean that there wasn't a big problem in the Catholic Church. It just means there are also false allegations. That does happen.
Yes, and also, I won't say the name again because you don't want to talk about it, but somebody was just accused of rape and he was found guilty, and the stooge said something, and I think she's suing him even again.
And I do try to keep politics out of this, but yes, we're talking about a former president of the United States. And yes, I totally believe he did all that stuff. Yes. So anyway, let me see here. Let me just ask you, to the extent that you feel comfortable, what's your origin story? How did you get to this place?
I knew since the age of 14 that the passage of Matthew said, "Go make disciples to the end of the earth," spoke to me. And ever since then, I wanted to be clergy. I struggled with it. And then I found out that you can go to another denomination where you don't have to be celibate. I said, let's try this. And I ended up going to the Episcopal Church. And I'm pretty
If
much
I just may interrupt you, you make a very valid point that it's the Roman Catholic Church that requires celibacy. The Orthodox and the Episcopal married priests is the norm. But go ahead, please.
Yes, also, and in the Orthodox Church, bishops usually are not married, or they're widowed, usually, in the Orthodox tradition. But, if you want to read Timothy 1 and 2, it talks about the requirements for, as you know, there's three extremes in the Catholic Church: deacon, deaconess, then there's presbyter, which is priest, and then there's bishop, which is overseer. These three tiers. As I said before, it looks like it's very possible that women were quite more active. But you also have to keep in mind, too, at that time, the churches met at people's houses and they had meals. And they had regular meals. They just didn't have just communion. That was done later on, as it evolved. But I think when it became more Roman, that's when the sexism came along. Because the Roman culture was pretty, sexist in their culture.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. And yes, the first couple hundred years of Christianity was at people's homes, not in big buildings. But yeah, go ahead. So yes, you felt the call at an early age then.
I'm sorry, what?
So you felt the call to ministry at an early age.
Yes, I did. As I said, 14 years old. I come from a Catholic family, a bit lopsided. My mother's kind of a religious fanatic. She went to parochial school up to the 6th grade. And my father, who was of Italian descent, was Catholic in name only. He didn't really go to church. He kind of made up his own rules, never read the Bible. And yeah, these are the people that's supposed to be the head of the church, which at the time, a lot of the priests and bishops were run by Italians in Italy. That's where the Vatican is. And yet, most Italians I meet are like the least religious people in the world. And then,
And I don't, let me just interrupt you for a second. I don't mean to in any way insult the Italian people at all, but I spent a year and a half of my life in Italy. And yes, the idea of being nominally Catholic was very common. That, sure, if you ask me what religion I am, I'm Catholic, but I don't follow any of that stuff, was an extremely common way of life. Please go ahead.
you didn't have a choice in Italy if you didn't. In fact, some people were under the leadership of the papacy. They didn't have a choice. That's only when Napoleon came and kicked some butt. Now, ironically, Napoleon Bonaparte was of Italian descent. Some people don't know that. And he wasn't that short. He was a bold man. When he conquered Italy, he took the crown from the Pope and crowned himself emperor.
Yes,
Removing,
that happened, yes. And he was of average height for his time, yes.
Yeah, he wasn't this, but the English tell us this lie, to make it sound like, oh, he was a little man, He probably did have an arrogance problem, because he did accomplish a lot. But he actually lived to old age, unlike, what was his name, Alexander the Great, who ended up dying. He was never satisfied, That's another thing people have to worry about in our society. How much do you need? How many houses do you need? How many shoes do you need? How many shirts you have to wear? what kind of car do you have? Like I have this iPhone that cost me $900. It's ridiculous, and it's but I was lucky to pay for it in installments. And I'm gonna make this phone last me as long as I can. I can't afford to buy a new phone every year, but that's what a lot of America's capitalism is about. It's about spending money, and they brainwash us to think, oh, you have to have new clothes. Like I know people that buy new clothes. I have clothes that are like 4 or 5 years old, and I'm okay with that. You know.
You're preaching to the choir here, my friend. Everything I'm currently wearing is at least 3 years old, and probably more than that. Please go ahead.
The sneak voice in because they deliberately make them to fall apart on you, which I think is awful. At least when we were young, shoes would last at least a year. I was told by a Nike representative when I worked at the Sports Authority that they make shoes so they fall apart usually within 6 months.
Wow, that's really fast. That's a really crappy product. I'm sorry. Wow, because Nikes used to be better.
Well, look what they do with software. Look what they do with software all the time. They make it that like I'm going to be forced to get another iPad soon because it doesn't have the software to update my apps anymore, and I paid real good money for the apps, so I don't want to get rid of the program, you know. So I'm probably going to end
Yes.
up buying it. So it's about making money. It's about money, 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 and that's another problem. Some of the Protestant churches practice the prosperity gospel, which is about money.
Oh yeah.
Like that Joe Osteen, he's the funniest thing I ever saw. I just watched the Hillsong documentary on Hulu and the one that's on Discover, and it's about that one preacher who was cheating on his wife, and he's preaching about being celibate, you know, and they fired him. And then another one that looks like the Hillsong leader was a pedophile.
Yeah, there's been a ton of problems there. That outfit, I don't even know if are they still around or did people go
Yes,
to jail? I'm
still,
not 100%, but
still quite popular. You know, they're still quite popular. They actually do have good services, but the problem is they don't have the theology. You know, I'm more of a traditionalist. I like liturgy. I like the ritual. You know, I like the candles, the crucifix on the wall. You know,
oh, I watched
simple.
one of the masses from your organization online, and yes, it was very traditional. It wasn't in Latin, but it was very traditional.
Yes, I don't know Latin. I barely know English, though.
It's all good, all good. Um, what would you say? What do you wish the general public understood better?
In general, or just talk about the church?
Uh, I'm well, both, I guess, but more, related to spiritual topics and related to the church.
Sure. I think what people have to realize when you go to church, you're not going to church to be with the preacher. You're not going to a church that's hip with the good music. You should be going there to listen to the message of Christ, which is to repent and change. The sacraments that are given by the church help to sustain the people to fully develop a Christian life. I think it's only in death that we fully become Christian because we're never removed from our sinful nature. Like, I don't know if you noticed when you were a kid, your mother or your father told you not to do something, and you did it anyways because you wanted to. Even say, I know what is right, but I do what is wrong because of our sinful nature. So, I mean, we have to learn to forgive. Jesus said, forgive up to 77 times 7 times. We won't get into heaven if we don't forgive others. And I hate to say this because it's not politically correct anymore, but Jesus is the only way to salvation. If you don't believe in Jesus, you're not saved. Now, others can disagree with that, and that's their right, but I can't change the Bible. That's where I'm struggling right now with the topic of homosexuality in the church. A lot of the priests in the independent movement are gay, and they're married, and they live this lifestyle. But what's more, the ones that are married doesn't bother me as much, but sometimes they just hook up and they use the churches to meet men, and they do their little thing, you know. And then, as I told you, some of them are wannabe bishops. Like I had one guy who told me that he was a bishop, and it turns out he wasn't even ordained a deacon. You know. So a lot of these independent movements are very fringe, and you don't know exactly where they fully stand and everything. Do your research, look into it, and if I can, I would like to bring out one more thing. People have to stay away from the occult. Now, I don't know if I believe the Ouija board is real, but enough people that complain about this say, you know, you should stay away from it. But there was an interesting show on Ben and Teller on Showtime. If you have Showtime, you can watch it on demand, and they show you how it's most likely, you know, bunk it. But again, why tempt fate? Why tempt it? Because you're allowing supposedly an entity to go through you. Now, these entities, you have no idea where they're coming from. And if they're real, they're probably demonic. You know, because we know when people are dead, they don't come back. Except for Jesus. You know? Now, people say their loved one comes back, comes an angel or something. That's not biblical. I'm a biblical purist, so you have to forgive me for that, you know? It gives
No,
people
I
peace of mind.
invited you here to tell us your beliefs. They're, you know,
Yeah.
those are your beliefs. Please, I want you to share them.
Yes. Well, anyways, I never would want to exclude people. So I always have my door open to the gay people. But at the same time, I'm not going to tell them that it's not a sin because I don't know. To me, if you're born that way, I don't see how it's a sin. But a lot of things God does, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, why give me desire to want to serve the church and make it so hard for me? You know, why was I born with this disability? I know what I want to say to you, and I'm pretty good at articulating it. But
Oh,
when
I
it
think
comes to
you've been
writing,
excellent this evening in spelling things out.
but when if I write stuff down, you'll see it's not very good, and people will assume because you can't write, you're not intelligent enough, and that part, you know, hurts. Especially as I said with
I'm
the
sure.
Episode church, you know, they're talking about God is love and everything, but apparently you're okay to sit in the back, but if you have a problem, you're not supposed to speak up, you know. Yeah. And that's like at the Episcopal church, they're going way too far too. Like the bishop primate before the last one, which is Bishop Michael Curry, who I love. But the one before him was a woman who was Italian, who didn't believe in the Trinity or in the literal resurrection of Jesus. Like, how is she the leader of our church at the time? Well, she was, and then there's another bishop called Bishop Spahn in the Episcopal Church who said that he disagreed with that too, saying that there was no Trinity and no resurrection. But if you don't believe in the resurrection, what's the point of being a Christian? You know?
Oh,
I
at
can
that
understand
point, I
people-
think you've kind of crossed the line into being something else. And if you want to be something else, that's fine for you, but you can't be this and not be this, you know.
Yes, there are people like that.
I mean this only in the most respectful way. But have you ever seen the movie Father Stew?
Yeah. I love that movie. It's pretty good.
Okay,
Actually
I was
bought a
going to
copy
say,
of
do you see any relevance there? Where they give him a hard time about becoming a priest because he has something.
MS. Yeah, but he was already studying at that point, and they actually did help him, and that was very rare. Usually they wouldn't do that. You know?
Yeah,
But
exactly. I thought things would be handled a lot better, more like in the movie than in real life, I guess.
yeah, the movies aren't very accurate on a lot of stuff. Then sometimes they are. So I mean, go figure. You know?
Oh yeah.
It just then there's another movie called The Good Catholic where this priest leaves the priesthood to be with a woman. And
Yeah. Is that based on a true story, I think, from South America?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'll have to I'll to get back on that. But
Because I know there was a guy who was a priest. I want to say Brazil, and the scandal came out that he was married to a woman and had 3 kids. And it's like, well, okay, you're kicking him out for that. I mean, considering everything else that's happened, maybe that's okay, you know?
yeah, in Latin America, from what I understand, a lot of the priests say they're living with their sister and live a secret life. Fair amount of them in South America
Very
do that.
interesting.
But there was that had an affair in Florida, and he ended up getting deflocked, and he ended up marrying the woman and became an Episcopal priest.
Wow.
So I mean, yeah, because you know he broke his vow. If you like it or not. I don't believe it's biblical. You know, it's only since the 10th century did they require you to be celibate. You know, because the time the priests were abusing their power, giving their children their churches and stuff, and they weren't legally supposed to do that. Don't forget too, priests in the Middle Ages, sometimes they were forced to become it because they were the last of the kids, especially the Irish. If they had many kids, usually their last kid, they'd have become a priest or a nun, depending on what the gender was, you know?
Because there's no more land to distribute. You can't be a farmer, and we only need so many soldiers. So you're going to join the priesthood, whether you feel the call or not. You're going. Yeah, that used to happen.
Thought by them to heaven, by them into heaven too, and that's in some ways misleading. But I want to repeat this again to everybody: don't go to church for the pasture. I mean, it's nice to have someone up there that motivates you, but you should be there for the message of God. You should be reading the scriptures. You have to apply it to your life. You can't just go to church on Sunday and Holy Day and expect your life to change. You have to look at yourself. You have to evaluate, am I living the right life? Is this right what I'm doing? Is it good that I'm sleeping with all these different women or men? You know? Is it good? Like now, in our society right now, most people are born out of wedlock. This was unheard of when we were growing up even. But now it's normal. Yeah? And at the same time, I don't think it's fair to stigmatize the children. But technically, under the old law, they're bastards. Do you know in Spain, if you were born illegitimate, they actually gave you a Spanish name, which literally meant bastard? They were rough.
That sounds terrible. I will
Does it?
mention a quote I heard. I don't know what denomination, but he was definitely a minister. And he said, there is no such thing as an illegitimate child, but there are many illegitimate, kind of wrapping things up here. What would you like to tell our listeners?
Well, I tell them that watch out for this new age stuff that's coming into our society. It's quite more dangerous than one would like to think. And you're opening doors. Like the people of the Church of Satan, they claim they don't worship the devil. But they do when they say hell, Satan, and all that crap. And then there's the Satanic Temple, which is, they say they're not Satan worshippers, but they are because they sign a thing saying that I sign my soul over to the devil, and they claim they don't believe in the devil. So I don't know what to tell you. I think we're living in very dangerous times. I'm noticing too there are more people that are using UFOs, aliens, as a religion. I don't know if you noticed that. I listened to a lot of
Yes, I'm well aware of that. I actually did a little presentation on that recently. Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah. And I remember back in college, undergrad, somebody said to me, "How can you believe in God but not in aliens?" And I go, "It just seems silly to me. You know, if there are aliens out there, I doubt they're coming down and alien chroming people. You know what I mean?"
No, I don't think that's exactly what happens either.
Yeah. I mean, I think those people are probably mentally ill. Some of them I'm not sure about. Like that one guy at Devil's Den, he had radiation all over his body. And his friend, something happened. I don't know what it was. Could it be something demonic? I don't know. I can't say. Like you did a show about the visions of Mary a while back.
Yes,
You really
yes,
should you should really that's how I found out about you, by the way. You were on
yes, we
paranormal.
connected on that. Yes, the Nisita Shrine. Yes.
Yes, and I don't really know much about that one, but there's something happening in Medjugorje right now. It's been over 20 years, and the church is saying that they're not sure if they validate it, but something's going on there, whatever it is, and stuff that happened in Lourdes in the 1800s. You know, people are getting healed there. They can't explain it. There's something going on there. You know what I mean? That people can't explain. God can do many things, and why couldn't He use His mother to explain stuff to us? For a lot of people in the Catholic tradition, the idea of God is seen very harsh, up to fairly recently, fire and brimstone. So what did you do when you wanted your dad to do something? You went to your mom to soften him up. That's how Catholics view Mary.
That makes a lot of sense. I have a very good friend who has recently come back to the Catholic Church, and he's a Roman Catholic, but he explained it almost precisely that way. And that yes, talking, praying to Mary, praying to the saints, asking for intercession is not the same thing as worship. You're just trying to get some good influence. And that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, that's why the word worship in English is not the Hebrew or the Greek, which is the two versions of the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. And they have a different word. Probably the proper word you would use for the saints is veneration. You're not like when you're praying the Ave Maria, it's the Hail Mary. The first part of it is purely biblical. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed and thou and blessed is the Iron Jesus. That's all biblical. Now, they added after the 15th century, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now at the hour of our death. To ask someone to pray for you, is that so terrible? I find the rosary a wonderful tool, and I actually pray all 20 decades every day.
Wow.
And I do daily office. You know, I try to, live a Christian life. I have my struggles. I, like Jimmy Carter, have busted in my heart. I have struggled.
Thank you for mentioning, in my humble opinion, one of the best presidents we ever had. And he gets slammed by the media, but no, I felt he was a deeply good person.
He was. And the funny part is, Reagan claimed what he did. And that's the problem with our society, is we have a lot of glam standards. Do you know that, in case people don't know who LBJ is, that is President Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson. He got us into Vietnam, escalated it. Did you know that he had planned to end the Vietnam War in October 31st, 1969? But Nixon, who was running for the president at the time, undermined him and actually went to Vietnam to keep the fighting going. So here he was undermining the president. So I think everyone that passed away after October 31st, 1969 is on the hands of Nixon and not LBJ, who seems to be truly heartbroken by the war. And mind you, his presidency was a war on poverty, something that we need now more than ever, because this country is hurting. There's no, the way it's going, people don't have the jobs they need. People don't have the education. Most people don't even have a college education, and that really surprises me. So they should push more trade school. Do you know most people never pick up a book after they graduate from high school, and then go through college too?
I would certainly concur that whatever his flaws, Lyndon Johnson was one of the best presidents we ever had. He got through, and when I say got through, he pushed people to make it happen, to end segregation in America with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and to allow Black people to vote with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And yes, he was going to end Vietnam. And you're completely correct. Nixon undercut him. That's a known fact. And yeah, that all that happened. And also, by the way, the New York Times recently admitted that Reagan's people went to Iran and the October surprise was real. Jimmy Carter had solved the hostage crisis, and the Iranians were going to let the hostages go. And then the Reagan campaign showed up and said, could you just hold these Americans a while longer so that it helps us in the election? We don't want Carter to have a win right before the election. And so they did. And that happened. That's an actual fact. It's admitted quietly in the New York Times. So yeah, some very dirty things happened.
You'll never hear the Republicans speak about that, which really annoys me.
No.
But I'll tell you the main reason why I push for Democrat, but I don't do it in my church, because we have a clear stand, no preaching. As I said, I'm speaking today as an individual, not.
Oh yes. Your views are your own.
Yeah, and the Republicans want to cut Social Security, and they want to do away with Medicare. Now, a while back when we had Obamacare, they had a chance with Trump, the Oompa Loompa, to offer a different insurance plan, but they didn't offer anything. No,
there was never a counter Obamacare. It was just Obamacare versus nothing. And so, yeah, there was never, some other plan. Yeah.
And in southern states, they could have extended Medicare for people, but they vote against it because they don't want it. There was that Speaker of the House, McCarthy, wanted to cut stuff on Social Security, and he's trying to push that you have to work for food stamps. I'll tell you though, I would like to work. I'm on disability, and I would like to work. I volunteer now, but I really need to make more money. I make a little under $2,000 a month, and that's nothing to live on. And if it wasn't for my mother and my brothers, I would be homeless.
Most people on disability would absolutely love to have a job. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I want to. I mean, here I have all these degrees, and yet I can't use them because people can't get past my disability. And it's very frustrating. And on top of it, where I live, it's very rural. And if you don't have a car, you can't go anywhere. And whenever I get my brothers to take me everywhere, it's a fight. They don't want to do it.
Oh, I hear you.
I tease my younger brother, so he has a right probably to hate me,
I just on a personal note, I'll tell you, my son is 19 and he has a job, but the amount of hoops he had to jump through to get an entry-level job at a big box hardware store was ridiculous. They say there's a worker shortage, but I'm sorry, that just seems like crap to me, because he applied and, he had a high school diploma, no criminal record, he's just an entry-level guy showing up to an entry-level job, and it took 2 to 3 months for them to background him. And I'm like, you're selling hardware at a retail store. You're not going to the CIA. What the hell takes so long? But that's the way they do things these days. The hiring process is insane.
Corporate politics. That might be the corporate politics.
Oh, it was all coming from the upper echelon, yeah.
Yeah. Look at Walmart. They disgust me. People shouldn't do business there. Do you know during a Thanksgiving, they actually had a display up for people to donate food to let the workers have a nice Thanksgiving. Can you believe it? They pay them the bare minimum, and so the government has to pick up the check, and they're allowed to do that. And people keep on going to Walmart.
They talk work requirements for food stamps, but a lot of people who are already working full-time still qualify for food stamps. And it's there's a much deeper systemic problem there.
Oh, and on top of it, I only get $12 of food stamps.
You can't possibly live on food stamps. I mean, just solely of that alone, that nobody can. It's ridiculous.
I want to work part-time. That's my goal,
Uh-huh.
And I'm actually a certified master life coach. I'm trying
Oh,
to get that. If anybody's in the Danbury area of Connecticut, look up Christ Focused Life Coaching. I offer my services for an hour, about for $20. Usually there's 3 or 4 sessions. And what we do is we try to help you to plan your options. Kind of like a glorified brainstorm. Help people to make decisions. Some people have a hard time making decisions. It's not therapy because I'm not licensed, but I am considered a master life coach. And I
it's
can
kind of like
advise,
guidance counseling, you might say.
yeah, almost life coaching. Some of it I think is just a racket. That's why I only charge, $20, which is a little bit over minimum wage. Right now in Connecticut, minimum wage is $15. So I'm just asking for $20, and I don't think that's unreasonable with all my degrees. As I said,
You
I'm
can
one
spend
degree
that the
short.
drive through really easy. Okay.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's just,
As I'm fond of telling people, with inflation, if you buy my novel, Cosmic Collision, I'm putting a plug in here. If you go on Amazon and buy my novel, it's cheaper than a Happy Meal. So, please. Inflation has affected everything. Yeah.
and then because of the war in Ukraine, and if there's another war in Kosovo, we're gonna have more problems. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's they need to open up more reserves. We have reserves. We need to open them up so the price of oil will go down. They don't want to do that though, because it'll hurt the bottom line. But the way they're going, if they're not willing to pay people more, how are they going to survive? And supposedly now they're saying now that in the near future they won't need workers. There are more and more computers that are doing it. So what are human beings going to do? What are they supposed to do? Like my dream, silly as it sounds, I'd like to have my own house. I'd like more
That's not
condos.
an unreasonable goal at all. No.
Yes,
It's a
but I
very
don't know if I'll
normal
ever
goal.
get that ability.
Hmm.
Because
There's
right now I'm under called Title 19. I can't literally have any savings. I have literally $10 to my name. Because
Wow.
if I have more than 200, they'll take away my insurance.
Wow. That is a rough situation to be in. And you are certainly
they
not
want to-
the first or last person that I know that's been in
Yeah.
that. And it's been very difficult.
So when people maybe say that there's people, welfare queens and stuff, yeah, maybe there are some that do it, but not most of them.
No,
Most of them are
that's
trying to
grossly
survive.
exaggerated. Are there some people who cheat the system? Certainly. But that's nowhere near the norm. The norm
Look at
is
Trump.
very harsh,
Look at Trump. He cheats everything.
I won't argue that. Won't argue that at all.
He doesn't pay taxes. I mean, it's ridiculous. He doesn't pay taxes. I love it. They had this big tax break for the millionaires, but for the rest of us, we didn't have it. And then what really bothered me the most about him is how he handled COVID. I didn't think he was that bad, but he dropped the ball over COVID. He said it was nothing. And there were idiots out there that said they could take, I think, horse tranquilizer or something.
There were so much misinformation, so many lies. A lot of people died for no good reason. It was terrible.
Yeah. Also, and then another thing, he watched the Capitol be attacked. He literally watched our government.
You're not going to get any defense from the former president here. In no way. I don't, do politics here. This is mostly where I go to get away from politics. But no, nobody can defend that. It's indefensible.
Political junkie, so you have to forgive me.
There's no problems. No problems. We're getting a little low on time. First of all, I'd like to thank you for being here tonight, Brother Seamus. I really have appreciated your insights on many things. Where can people find you?
You can look up Our Lady of the Dormition, and I also have another website called the postdenominational.com. and they could see my web page there. If people figure out who I am, they're welcome to befriend me on Facebook. And as I said, I'm not speaking for anyone else but myself. And as a person on disability, I have to care more about things because it affects me more. You know, if it wasn't for social, my mom wouldn't have it. That's why I'm so anal about that. That's why people are saying, "Oh, you know," it's very frustrating because I need to survive just like everybody else. And there are a lot of people out there that don't have health insurance, that can't even afford insulin. And I need insulin to survive. I have to shoot up an insulin a bunch of times during the day. When I eat food, 15 units each time. And then at nighttime, I have to take 60 units. So these are two different forms of insulin. But I'm just saying, stuff to live on. Now, luckily, because I'm under Title 19, they pay for all that. But at the same time, I have no savings. If something would happen to my mother, I don't know what I'm going to do. If she's going to pass away eventually, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen to me. To be honest with you, I'm scared shitless.
I don't blame you at all. I myself am diabetic, and if it wasn't for the VA, I can't guarantee that I'd be alive. I can only wish you all the best. And again, I really appreciate you coming here tonight. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
I'd like to leave everyone. May the Schwartz be with you. Manu.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Folks, thanks for listening. This has been The Weird Part. I'm your host, Vincent Truebell. Good evening.